My name is Craig Sell, and I welcome you to the PACE Insights series sponsored today by VocalPoint Consulting. The subject is Make the Most of Your Technology Purchasing Decision from Beginning to End. VocalPoint Consulting is an independent technology consulting firm with a focus on contact center and unlimited communications who helps with all varieties of technology purchasing decisions such as moving premise-based infrastructure to the cloud, internet connectivity across multiple locations, security, and more. On this PACE Insight, we are joined by Derek Roush, president of VocalPoint Consulting, who will share his expertise. Good morning, Derek.
Good morning, Craig.
So let's just get this kicked off. Why would a company want to use an independent consulting firm rather than doing the research and going through the procurement process on their own?
So the way we view the procurement process in the old days, because I come from, Avaya, and wow, they taught us really well to do by PowerPoint and just to throw up all these features on clients, right? And so as I transitioned into my business in 2010, we started VocalPoint, and we really wanted to kind of flip the script on that a little bit and change that narrative. And the problem is that most people, when they meet with a lot of different vendors, you've got these sales guys that are coming in there and telling you just whatever they want to tell you to make sure that that square peg can fit into that round hole. So whatever, you give as an objection, they're going to, be trained and taught to handle those objections, turn it around, turn it into a positive, and make sure that they can retire their quota for that, coming quarter or whatever, so that they can keep their job, right? That's not us. We want to really come to the table and say, okay, what problem are we trying to solve for? And then we'll go out and we'll source the right technology to solve for that problem. So we'll draft up the scope of work from, beginning to end, help the client, transition through that process, and then we'll make some recommendations for that technology. And as brokers, because we broker today about 300 different brands, we want to make sure that we can stay agnostic in that process as much as possible so that we can, target the solution that's going to fit, for that client and solve for that problem. And then if the client chooses what we are recommending, well, then we will come back and do all the project management. We'll even negotiate the contract and all that and make sure that, it gets installed correctly and that the client's going to be happy for the term of the entire project.
Great insight. So, Derek, in your opinion, why wouldn't a company just issue an RFP if they understand their requirements?
So that's a good question. RFPs, we hate them, to be honest with you, just because they are a race to the bottom. Any company that has ever answered RFPs, and I've been one of those companies, so I know this well, you're going to answer that RFP with the least amount of product. In other words, I'm going to meet the minimum requirements so that I can come in under budget just to get my foot in the door. And then half the time, once that foot's in the door, well, now I can, sell other ancillary services to that client and blow up the price where I needed to make my margins back. And so we don't want to do that. We want to, if we're going to go out and source, different solution providers, we're going to pit those guys against one another. We're going to do all the digging into those guys to make sure that, they're financially stable, that they're not going to be, selling off that product line and leave our customer hanging, right? We're going to do a lot of that uncovering of, what does that support look like? What does the SLA look like? How can we, negotiate a good contract for that client? So if we can do all that on the front end, then it defeats the need for an RFP process. And we want to just get rid of that because it's just, like I said, a race to the bottom and it doesn't serve the client well.
Very interesting. So to recap, tell me, why would you avoid the RFP process and how do you flip that process?
Well, we're flipping it by in terms of bringing suppliers to the table that actually meet their needs. So we're going to do all the back end of, kicking the tires on these guys and making sure that they're going to meet at least 90% of the checklist that we have and the requirements that we have before we even bring them to the table. Because we don't want, bringing in a supplier, having them do a demo, writing up a proposal, and then we've, go to do a POC or something, or we test it out, and then we find out that it doesn't even work the way that they, sold it as. So we want to do all that on the front end, which is, why we think the, RFP process doesn't work well. There's so much that the RFP process misses, and so we're trying to, just circumvent that process. And I don't know if that fully answers everything that you were looking for there, but yeah, that's my, 2 cents on that.
Yeah, no, very, very good input. Thank you. So give me an example of how you've helped with contract negotiations.
So I'll give you a good story. We had a client, and I'll leave the vendor names out of this just for sake of the vendors. But we had a client that wanted a particular vendor. The IT director was like, "Hey, I saw a demo. I really like this platform. I want to get it." And we told them at the time they were, I want to say, about 30 locations, and about 500 users. So not a huge organization, but big enough to where, a bad decision could hurt. And unfortunately, what this IT director wanted, we said, "Look, it's not our recommendation, but we'll go out and get you a contract for it, and we'll help make sure that it gets installed." We got him what he wanted, negotiated the price that he wanted, and everything was good there. The problem was when we went to install it. So we found that there was some real intricacies in how they installed the software. And the fact that my client didn't have IT people at every location to, do the work that was required for the installation. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to get into too many details and give that away, but what happened was we got 7 months into it and we could only get 7 of those locations installed. Their people just threw up their hands and said, "Look, this just isn't working." We said, "Same here. It's not working. Let's, figure out what we do." The client had signed a 3-year contract, and they wanted $299,000 in early termination fees to back out of that contract. So I said, "Okay, look, I tell you what, let's amend this to a 1-year deal where we'll finish up in, a few months. You guys can keep what's installed. And, you have a year of billing. The client can go a different direction and everybody's happy. We get a little bit of billing, and you guys can retire some quota and such." And they said, "Well, okay, we'll go with a 1-year deal, but it has to start in January." And this was October at this time. I said, "Why would the client sign a 1-year deal on something that's, partially installed, and what is installed doesn't even work correctly?" So we had to go toe to toe with their general counsel at this supplier. But we ended up negotiating that $299,000 to $40,000. And the new supplier that we brought in was able to give some incentives and some bonuses back to the client, plus the month in billing back to the client. We got them back in the tune of $58,000 on the $40,000 that was owed to the old supplier. So basically we got them on the upside. So that's kind of a good example of how we can, maybe help facilitate that. Most of our suppliers, we have access all the way to the C level. So if we have to, shake some trees and kick down some doors, that's what we'll do. But that's probably a really good example of how we can help with those sort of negotiations.
Thank you for sharing that, Derek. So, what is your one piece of advice on getting out of a bad contract? And then part two, this give me your take on SLAs. You mentioned those earlier and your thoughts around them.
Yeah, well, and so to answer your first question is stop concentrating on the SLA, right? And so everybody says, oh, I want to make sure that I have a good SLA going into it, and SLAs can be a little bit deceiving. So what we recommend is stop focusing on the SLA and focus on term and termination, because those are different parts of the contract. SLA says, hey, if I have some downtime, what are you going to do, Mr. Supplier, to pay me back for the loss of business for that day or those few hours that I'm down? And so you'll see these suppliers throw out these things like, oh, we'll give you 10 times the amount of downtime that you have back in money back in your pocket. But if you really break that down, so let's say you're paying $900 a month for a service, that would equate to what, $30 a day? And if you're down for, 6 hours or whatever, so what would that break down to? $30 a day and 6 hours, you're probably talking about, $10 back in your pocket. Multiply that time as a 10x. Well, you got $100 back in your pocket. So you get to take your folks out to lunch. That's about it. Yeah. What we say is, focus on the term and termination. In other words, if the crap hits the fan, how do I get out of this bad relationship? And if you focus on writing a good term and termination clause, that's where we feel like you're really going to be able to win and get a good solid contract that's written well for you. Because if something happens, you want to be able to pivot. You want to be able to walk away in 2-3 months, whatever it is, in case they can't perform to what you're, whatever that SLA is, right? So the SLA is just a piece of it. The term and termination is, let's go a different direction. So really focus there.
So insightful. Thank you again. So let's flip gears here a little bit. Can you tell me why you have such a heavy focus on project management?
So, when I got into this industry a long time ago, because at the end of the day, we're brokers. We help broker the right technology to, solve for whatever problem that client is trying to solve for. In the old days, in what we call the independent or indirect channel, you had a lot of guys that were just slinging bandwidth, selling circuits and making money on circuits and getting those things installed. Then as the cloud kind of morphed, you got into some more complexity. It wasn't just selling a phone system and having that installed. It was selling software, and a lot of times go out and they buy the software, but then they go, okay, now what? How do I install it? How do I make it, integrate with whatever applications I'm trying to do on Screen Pops or my CRM, right? That's the gap that we saw in the whole UCaaS industry and in the contact center space. You would go out and buy the software, but then the client was left holding the bag when it came to installation and some of that project management of making sure that it got installed correctly and to whatever specs that client was trying to install for. So we started developing project managers that could help tie it all together, because a lot of times it's not just a phone system or it's not just a contact center software. Sometimes they have to work together, and then we have to have carriers involved that are integrating maybe SIP or new fiber connections or whatever that looks like at the various locations for bandwidth. And so tying all that together and getting these guys to work together was something that was really difficult in the past. So that's why we started focusing heavily on project managers that could keep these guys on task and making sure that, if we were installing a new phone system, that we were grabbing CSRs at the right time, that we were, gathering all the numbers that were needed to be ported, and that we would ensure that those numbers needed or were ported over correctly, and then go back into a bill review and make sure that, even the billing matched up to what the client signed for. So that goes into all of our project management, and that's how we, help our clients after the sale.
Very nice. So in closing, Derek, do you have any other insights that you'd like to share today?
Well, I always tell any enterprise business is, just stop dealing with indirect salespeople. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but most of the indirect sales guys, or the direct sales guys, I should say, they're not focused on what your needs are. They're really focused on just retiring their quota and keeping their job. We really want to take that focus and put it onto the client and say, what do you need to make this project work well? And so that's probably my biggest thing. Really the two things that you could pull out of here: stop, dealing with direct salespeople, and focus on term and termination in your contract. Those are two areas that really could help a client tremendously going forward when they're dealing with multiple vendors or trying to source new contact center software or workforce management software or whatever it is. Just look at some of the independent solution providers that are out there. They're on your side, and they'll work for you and not the suppliers.
Excellent. Well, thank you to our viewers for listening today, and thanks to Derek Roush of VocalPoint Consulting as our sponsor. I am Craig Sell with Pace, and listen in for the next big insight coming our way soon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.